All right, good afternoon, and welcome to Wayne County Board of Education work session, July 20th. We're just getting started here about 4:09. I want to welcome everybody back. We've had a bit of a break and vacation, so good to see everyone again here and around the table and back at work. And so we've got a pretty busy day, so we'll get started with our update on the 2021-22 Virtual Academy Program Planning. So I'll turn it over to Superintendent Moore, and you can drive from here.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Drew, who will give you the most up-to-date information on it in terms of where we are right now, and knowing, quite frankly, that we are, our first group of kids are this week, right? So, Drew.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, board members. We do appreciate the opportunity to bring you this afternoon a follow-up to the most recent presentation and discussion on the 2021-2022 Virtual Academy Planning that we provided back, it seems like yesterday, but it was June the 15th. Today, along with Dr. Matillo from Human Resources and other members of our Virtual Academy Planning team, our goal was to provide updates in several different areas, including things like recruitment and staffing practices for the Virtual Academy, the current state and focus of our year-round schools, which will start Virtual Academy courses in just under 2 weeks on August the 2nd. And also we'll provide you with a timeline and an overview and next areas of focus for recruitment and hiring practices moving forward. Like so many other aspects of our operation right now, a lot of the focus is on staffing and hiring, and it's no different with the Virtual Academy. Before we go into some of the details of today's updates on staffing, though, I'll just provide a quick recap and review, if you will, of some of the topics we've covered previously. It has been 5 weeks or so since we've come before you and provided an update, so we just wanted to kind of do a quick review before we go into more details today. As you know, the Virtual Academy team has been working tirelessly for months to design and implement a plan for the 2021-2022 school year that is as flexible and responsive to our changing circumstances as is humanly possible, recognizing once again that it's impossible for us to be able to predict exactly what's going to be happening a couple of months down the road, much less a couple weeks down the road. And so that's been the context that we've been working within now, really going back to January of this year. We do continue to approach the 21-22 school year as a year of transition from what the previous Virtual Academy model looked like last year to what may follow at some point in the future. Previous presentations and discussions over the last few months have included information and details covering, as you know, multiple aspects of our planning. Some of those areas include things like an overview of the vision, purpose, and program goals for the 2021-2022 school year, information on the Virtual Academy registration and enrollment process, including related district and school level data points, specifically enrollment data by school, by grade level. We've also provided a description of program structure and the instructional model itself, along with course scheduling processes, which, as you might imagine, by itself is a truly massive undertaking with more than 10,000 plus students participating as of this week, or plan to participate as of this week. We've also, you may recall, provided a summary of the expectations and responsibilities that have been developed and communicated to all stakeholders in advance of the enrollment process, including teachers, students, and families. So much has been done. A lot of hard work has been done. Much has been communicated, but it's safe to say much is yet to be done in the days and weeks ahead, both in terms of our planning and also implementation. Just a quick mention, we also, you may recall, back in June, shared and discussed factors and dependencies as we continue our district and school level planning efforts. One of those factors that we referenced back on June the 15th was Senate Bill 654, which, if ratified, could have significant impacts on the plans that we've developed over the past 4 to 5 months. In the month plus since June the 15th, there's not really a whole lot of new information to share on the bill. As you'll recall, I believe sometime around June 14th or 15th, the House and the Senate approved different versions of the bill, and a conference committee of House and Senate superintendent members was appointed. But beyond that, we're not aware of any additional action or movement on this front. We'll, of course, will continue to closely monitor any new actions or information with the bill, and we'll obviously keep you apprised if and when we learn more in the days and weeks ahead. In the meantime, we will continue moving forward as planned since the middle of January and into February. So that's a quick recap of the bigger picture surrounding Virtual Academy planning. We wanted to provide that with you since it's been more than a month. So with that context and background at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Matillo, who is going to kind of walk us through the presentation and go into some specifics today really around the staffing and recruitment piece as it relates to Virtual Academy. So Dr. Matillo.
Thanks, Drew. Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, members of the board, Superintendent Moore. I'm here to provide you today with updates regarding Virtual Academy teacher hiring. This is the first time our district has created specific positions for Virtual Academy teachers. To provide you with some basic context, I'll begin by sharing a little bit about the qualifications and expectations of the educators who will serve in these roles. As with our in-person teachers, Virtual Academy teachers must be eligible to hold or currently hold the North Carolina Professional License to Teach. They will be paid on the North Carolina teacher salary schedule with the Wake County supplement and are eligible for benefits just like our in-person teachers would be. In terms of what their day-to-day work will look like, most of these teachers will be assigned to a specific school and will report to their assigned school each day to provide virtual instructions. While our preference is that all Virtual Academy teachers report in person to their assigned school, HR may also approve some telework for teachers in schools that have either some space limitations or cases where there are currently vacant positions that are hard to fill. We're getting quite a bit of interest from outside the area and want to position ourselves to be able to take advantage if needed. Some Virtual Academy teachers will teach from multiple schools or students from multiple schools because some schools don't have the need and will have to combine some classes to efficiently maximize resources based on the enrollment. Teachers hired to support Virtual Academy may also be expected to teach in-person students during the second semester, and we're trying to make that clear to folks as we hire, just depending on changes in student enrollment in VA, and if the district reevaluates Virtual Academy mid-year based on factors such as vaccination availability for children and such things. So we've learned we just need to be flexible and adapt as needed. We are currently recruiting internal and external candidates for these positions. Teachers who choose to transfer from teaching in-person students to serving in a VA position will keep their current contract status, and that's important to know. New teachers who are hired for VA positions will be placed on contracts that end June 30th, 2022. Next, I want to walk you through the hiring process a little bit for Virtual Academy teacher positions. There are two types of positions that will support Virtual Academy. First, schools have existing teaching positions that they've been allotted through our normal allotment process, and schools obviously will use some of those resources to support both in-person and Virtual Academy classes. When a principal chooses to assign one of his or her existing teachers to support Virtual Academy instruction, no additional HR involvement action is really needed. This teacher continues to report to the assigned school and maintains current salary and contract status, just teaches virtual students at the school instead of in-person students. But we also have new additional Virtual Academy positions to support schools. In consultation with schools, area superintendents requested additional teaching positions for elementary and middle schools needing more staff members to support Virtual Academy for 2021-22. These additional positions were created to align with our commitment to eliminate concurrent teaching and to provide additional flexibility to mitigate any potential negative impact on in-person instruction. So at the elementary level, we have 67 new teaching positions that were assigned to various schools. At the middle school level, we had 57 new teaching positions that have been assigned mostly to Davis Drive Elementary for traditional and Salem Middle for year-round students enrolled in the VA. Next in the hiring process, principals receive position numbers, and HR posted these additional positions as we do all positions in AppleTrack. And then in the third step, principal continues to interview applicants, select desired candidates, and submit recommendations to HR just like they normally would. And then finally, teacher contracts with various end dates depending on the candidate, if they're an internal transfer or a new hire, are approved by the board as you do all hiring recommendations. So we knew this was a new type of position for the district and that we would need to do some additional work to recruit applicants to fill this unique job role. So on top of our regular hiring processes, we are using additional strategies to share information about these positions with internal and external audiences. First, the VA teacher positions are highlighted on a new public-facing landing page at wakecounty.net Virtual Academy Jobs. The landing page has seen nearly 8,700 views since we launched it in early June. Information about these positions has also been included in recent communications with the district email messages to families. And we've recruited for these positions internally on Wake Connect as well as our employee newsletters. In addition, we currently have more than 300 applicants registered for an online information session we will hold tomorrow, July 21st at 5 p.m. And we will be posting the recording online for all those who can't attend. So an additional 300 applicants are interested. And of course, we continue to use social media to advertise these positions as we've used for bus driver, child nutrition, substitute teachers in the past. Some applicants are also sending us resumes directly via LinkedIn and Facebook, and we're screening those candidates and then passing them along to hiring managers as well. So thanks in part to this work, we are currently seeing a fill rate of 81% among virtual positions at year-round schools. I've been talking kind of in general terms first, but right now our focus is on the year-round schools since they are to start first on August 2nd. So. And again, this rate is among positions that were either originally allotted to the schools or that have been added to year-round and middle schools, although some of the middle schools that were recently allotted are not included in this rate. But I think 81% gives you a pretty good feel for where we are with year-round virtual academy staffing right now. We have a total of 203 year-round positions to support virtual, and again, not reflective of some of the new middle school positions. It is also very important to remember that we are in the middle of a very busy hiring season. Summer learning, virtual academy has definitely increased our normal workload. So this is a snapshot in time. This data changes not even daily, but hourly and sometime by the minute. But this does give a good snapshot. We also surveyed our year-round principals to get this data last week, so we would assume that this has improved a little bit since then. And I'll give you one example. I was on the phone with one principal just clarifying one of the response rates, and during the course of that conversation, the conversation started with a vacancy, and by the time we finished the conversation, somebody let them know that we had filled that position. So truly, minute by minute, some of this data does change. But again, it gives you a general sense of where we are. And just as a reminder, again, we're looking at two types of virtual academy positions. We have 158 originally allotted year-round elementary and middle school positions designated for VA. So that's 158 of the original positions that principals are using. And then we have additional positions. Of those positions, 131 are filled and 27 are vacant. So we're looking at about an 83% fill rate for those originally allotted positions for a year-round virtual academy. And then we have our new positions. There's our 45 additional and new positions assigned to year-round and middle schools to support virtual academy. And we have 15 of those filled, 8 vacant, and then those 22 middle school positions that have recently been posted. So that rate is a little bit lower at 65%, but those positions also were more recently allotted and posted, so we would expect it to be a little bit lower at this time. So for our next steps, we'll continue our immediate focus on the year-round staffing. Again, we hold the virtual information session tomorrow night where we have 300 registered at 5 p.m. And then through late July, we will continue recruitment advertising and post additional positions, probably for high school by the end of the month. We're still working through the planning of those positions. And then in early August, we will begin surveying traditional calendar principals regarding their VA openings and turn our support directly to those schools. Again, year-round Virtual Academy students will begin online learning on August 2nd as they follow that Track 4 schedule, and then traditional and modified VA students will start with the traditional calendar start date on August 23rd. So I hope that gives you a sense of where we are with hiring at this time, and Drew and team and I are happy to take questions that you have.
All right, thank you, sir, for that update. Questions from the board? Vice Chairman Happy.
Thank you. Dr. Matillo, I'm assuming those traditional calendar positions are on AppleTrack, and those principals are trying to recruit. It's just where your team gets involved with the additional push is what we're looking at on that last slide with the timeline? Is that correct?
Yeah, so those positions are still out. They're being hired. We just focusing on year-round first. But yes, they're still, they're out there and working on them.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And the 300, the information session tomorrow is for traditional calendar schools as well. That is also not just limited to year-round. So that'll help some of those traditional calendars also.
Dr. Martin.
Thank you. So I understand that the conversation here today is focused mainly on the VA. What's our teacher hiring rate for the regular in-person classrooms?
Yeah, right. Yeah, good question. We'll go into that a little bit with the IA bonus on some slides, but we're looking at about a 97% fill rate for all classroom positions. And again, that's a brief snapshot in time, but that gives you a sense of where we are.
The other question I have, which is sort of maybe an intermediate discussion, we've spent a lot of time, as we rightly should, to try to create structures where in-person will be taught all in-person and virtual will be taught all virtual, because the hybrid really is the most difficult way for teaching and learning. Where my point of concern is, and what I'd like to know sort of where we are in the thinking, is that the reality is cases are going up, there's going to be quarantine, kids are going to be out of school. So particularly if you're, I think about a block schedule high school student, if you're out of school for a week, well, we all know that the hybrid option really was not good and needed to be avoided. If you are out for a week on quarantine, you could still keep up and participate to the greatest extent that your health allowed you to do so. What are our plans this year? Because undoubtedly, we hope the numbers are small, but undoubtedly there will be kids out quarantined for a week. I don't think we want to just sort of push those students into a virtual academy classroom, because that disrupts that group. But they're going to be out of the in-person classroom. So what are our intermediary plans, and do we need to think about yet a third cohort of staff to deal with that space?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Martin. So I think that is a question that has a lot of complexities to it, right, even as the way you framed the question. Number one, most directly, it is absolutely something that, among all the other factors and considerations that you can imagine, our team is working to account for. When we say circumstances continue to evolve, that is precisely what we're planning for, or working to plan for. So I think, you described it, I think, well, where we can account for our virtual academy students, and we've already got some flexibility built in, right? As we started this presentation, we talked about the flexibility that our community wants, right, that our board wants, that we want to be able to provide to our students, even in the context of vaccine availability. One of those, worst case scenarios that we began talking about, and you asked about even going back to January, was what happens if we start to see increases in those rates. And so, something that we're already talking about and discussing is what happens when we have increasing number of kids that are quarantined. The reality is, as flexible as we can be, there won't be necessarily, depending on the course, depending on the school, a virtual academy seat that's open for them to immediately slide into, even if it's for a week or two. That's not a guarantee at this point.
But even sliding into virtual academy is something we said isn't going to happen.
Correct. In other words, there's no accommodation that we can make that's going to automatically move those students into a virtual academy section without unduly negatively impacting the students in that class. And so we have to plan for that middle ground potentially, which is a whole nother layer of this conversation. And so we've provided guidance already, for example, to our schools in the what-if scenarios when students have to quarantine. I think it almost goes back to some degree to our pre-pandemic structures where we might not be able to guarantee live instruction, for example. But, the classroom teacher will work as hard as he or she can to ensure that the resources are provided, access is there, follow-up and guidance is provided to the degree that's possible. But, I think the hardest thing that we'll have to plan for is if, in fact, we are in that middle ground where, the cases are such that we don't have the capacity to be able to accommodate every one of those scenarios. And I think we've got to be able to say clearly the flexibility that we have has limits. And when we're talking about the virtual academy, when we're talking about the classroom in-person experience, there are limitations on what we can do.
So I guess if I can clarify, my concern is actually less about, the major case. If a whole classroom needs to shut down, that actually becomes an easier thing to take care of. That's an easier scenario. Right? So the major cases that might require, some significant action, that is way easier to figure out. What I'm more concerned about is the one-offs, because I think there's going to be a lot of one-offs. And if you just happen to be the kid who has to be quarantined or is sick for a week or two, you're right. We have to deal with this to a degree at any time, but I think we are going to be looking at bigger numbers than an average year, even though we hope and pray that it's not, catastrophic numbers that require sort of shutdown. And so that's where it just feels to me like we need some intermediate level of planning. And so that's where, my question is, do we need a third tier of employee, not just the in-person, not just the virtual academy, but, do we need, we have these, coaches that, like the technology resource teachers that teach across grades, across platforms. Do we need some of that category to deal with what's likely to be a higher number of one-offs rather than, say, a whole classroom?
And I think that's certainly a consideration in terms of additional resources. The challenge, as you well know, is obvious, and that is it is impossible to predict at any given time exactly which staff or new teacher or new support person would be needed and where and for how long. And in that regard, I would say we're in a better position, at least in terms of mitigating negative impact on the in-person experience if, in fact, we do end up with larger scale vaccinations at some point and we end up doing that reevaluation mid-year. The additional positions that Dr. Matillo just described actually go above and beyond what was allotted originally in our classrooms, which does allow us the flexibility, for example, mid-year, to move resources in a way that's not taking away from the classroom experience. So we want to mitigate that as much as we can. But you're absolutely right, and that is absolutely a wicked problem that I think and a challenge that all of us are discussing, and we'll have to be prepared for. I don't know, though, that it's something as concrete as being able to pinpoint an exact number of additional staff that we can deploy when ready. I think it's likely to be a combination of strategies both at the district and the school level. And again, if we see the numbers continue to increase and we see larger numbers of students on a rolling basis that are quarantined regularly, then I think that actually positions us to be able to make more permanent infrastructure hires, for example, to provide that support. It is not an easy question to provide an answer to, but it's one that I can assure you is at the forefront of every what-if scenario that we're running right now.
So to Dr. Martin's point, would substitutes be able to, as opposed to an intermediary level that he's talking about, what about our subs? How are we doing on subs, and do you have subs that are either in-person or virtual, or do you have subs that are flexible and can do both, in-person or virtual?
That's a conversation we've been having as well. I know that we are working to develop a cadre of virtual substitutes Even anticipating, notwithstanding what may happen with numbers, even with the higher rates that you just saw, we might anticipate that if we don't reach a 100% fill rate, there will be a need for, at least on a short-term basis, substitutes virtually. And so HR is working to develop a training for substitutes and try to have a cadre of folks that, might not ordinarily be inclined to substitute teach, but actually might have the skill sets and the desire to teach virtually on a substitute basis. And AJ, there may be more to add, but the answer to your question is yes, that is something that we're planning for and working to develop so that we have a pool of subs, both virtual and in person, and then there'll be some crossover where folks would, may not have a preference one way or the other, would be available in either environment.
Yeah, I would just add briefly to that we still have thousands of subs who have signed up again to substitute this year, and as recently as this week have reached out to develop that list again. We did it last year to see who is comfortable and who is willing to do virtual, so we've developed that process again to reach back out to those subs. Our fill rates are really good now because it's just year-round schools that are in, so that is not a good indication of where we might be. The sub pool appears strong, but just like last year, we're going to have to wait to see of the willingness of our subs to fill positions.
Yes, I think if you got a strong sub pool, then that would kind of address Dr. Martin's point. Ms. Kushner.
Thank you. And also to follow up to the quarantining, if the student 12 and older is fully vaccinated, asymptomatic, CDC says they would not need to quarantine. Same as a staff member who's fully,
Thank you.
a staff member or a student who's fully vaccinated, would they need to quarantine?
That is correct. If you are
That is
fully
correct.
vaccinated and an exposure with no symptoms, you do not need to quarantine, whether you are a student or an adult.
So I really hope that parents and families take that into consideration, that if to be in person and fully vaccinated would eliminate quarantine if your student's asymptomatic. And my main question for VA is about attendance. And we talked at the board level about students who had struggled in remote learning during the pandemic, who may have still be applying for virtual academy. And we've worked hard on our attendance policy, how are we going to make sure that students who may not have had successful attendance and engagement during remote learning, but for some reason elected to enroll in VA, that we're going to be making sure that they are attending and engaged?
That's a great question, actually one we talked about just this afternoon. So a couple of things. Number one, I think you just referenced it in your question. We do acknowledge and recognize that, sometimes a family is very well aware, for example, that their student didn't thrive in the virtual environment, and for whatever the reason, health or otherwise, they've made the decision to apply for and perhaps enroll in the virtual academy. I think, our principals have been having, and counselors have been having conversations with families, and in some cases it was a front-end conversation and perhaps trying to provide a different perspective and make sure that the family was fully prepared and understanding of what some of the challenges may have been even before they enrolled in virtual academy. In the end, in a lot of scenarios, it's likely that perhaps the student still chose to enroll because of family health dynamics, for example. Those students, I think our principals know who they are up front. And I think one of the things that we were talking about this afternoon is being alert early in terms of being able to identify and measure engagement and find those students, particularly those that perhaps struggled previously, that will need a additional helping hand and support early on. And it may very well be at some point that, it's just not working for the student. And I think those are the kinds of conversations that our schools and our principals and our counselors have already engaged in to some degree, and no doubt will be doing the same once the school year starts and we begin to see firsthand what the performance of students looks like, what some of those challenges and barriers might be.
The technical device issue, we can address
Correct.
that.
Is it access? Is it technology? Is there some other impediment that's making it difficult for the student to be able to be successful in that environment?
I think we're going to need to emphasize attendance and engagement.
And if I may add, I think something that was referenced earlier in the presentation, the development of the parent, student, and teacher responsibilities as a part of the messaging for choosing virtual academy also provide a framework from which to have those discussions.
Because again, it would, if we have to have a student re-enter in person, it's another layer of complexity that we're adding to an already complex year. So thank you,
ma'am.
Mr. Cook and Dr. Mottello.
Mrs. Cash.
So I had a few questions, but actually you've answered them, which kind of gives me the sense that you guys have talked or thought about every possible thing that we could think about.
Talking and thinking about it are two different things from having a solution. Yes, ma'am.
Well, that's okay. Talking and thinking about is good. And so I appreciate that. I think you guys have done a yeoman's job of trying to put together a staff to handle so many complexities in a school system this large. So I appreciate that, and so thank you.
Well, thank you. And I just want to take an opportunity to be very clear that we've got folks, Lauren Acom and Alicia Miller, and I think this is important. We've got central services folks who have other professional responsibilities where this has been their primary responsibility for the last 4 to 5 months. And they are working around the clock with area superintendents. They're working with principals. They're working with other central services departments, whether it's human resources, data research and accountability, and others, to ensure that every possible support, every possible piece of guidance can be provided so that our students can have success. And going back to Dr. Martin's very challenging question, how can we be prepared and not be caught flat-footed when the eventualities of a pandemic rear their heads again? And I think we've even used the term, of 2021, 2022. Our intent is that it's a post-pandemic transition year. I think it's safe to say it's gotten a little harder in the last couple weeks to use the word post. And so that's just the reality and the roller coaster ride that our folks are working with. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you, Ms. Cash, but the folks behind Dr. Matillo and myself are the ones that are really putting in the work and that are really working well outside their quote-unquote lane to put this together for 10,000 plus families and students that need it, and others that may need it at some point in time, depending on how things evolve. So thank you.
Well said.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cook, and that's very gracious of you. Thank you, Dr. Matillo, as well. We appreciate the update.
Thank you.
Not sure I'm going anywhere.
You're not sitting down, are you?
No, ma'am.
All right, so the next item is our instructional assistant sign-on bonus. And that's also brought to us by Dr. Matillo. So.
Yes, sir. Thank you all. At your June 15th meeting, you approved a $1,200 recruitment bonus to support our efforts to hire bus drivers for the new school year. Today, we wanted to present an additional proposal for a $1,200 recruitment bonus to help schools attract candidates to fill instructional assistant positions. We know that IAs serve a critical role in our schools and our classrooms every day, partnering with teachers and supporting students directly in those classrooms, as they provide consistent coverage as well when a teacher is not in the room. They're one of our most critical classroom or positions in the entire district. So we want to make sure that we are recruiting and doing everything we can to fill those positions. I want to talk a little bit first about the qualifications of an IA. We'll go into a little bit about our current vacancies and why we're proposing the additional recruitment bonus at this time. For most IA positions, candidates must have a high school diploma or a GED. IAs working in elementary schools designated as Title I must also meet the highly qualified standard under the federal Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, like you heard it called. To meet this,
Just out of curiosity, should we be running the presentation? Or
yes, we should.
Okay.
Sorry,
We're on
missed that.
slide 2.
And what are the requirements to be highly qualified under ESSA?
Yeah, so you can meet that in 3 different ways. An associate's degree, which is usually about 60 classroom hours from an accredited college or university. You could also meet it through 48 semester hours, so if you were short. Or you can pass, they call a work keys exam. It's a competency test, and then have 96 clock hours of professional development. And those clock hours could be a combination of courses that you've done, other courses that you've learned, have taken on your own. So those are the 3 different ways to meet that highly qualified standard. Yep. IAs are paid on the non-certified staff salary schedule, which begins at $11.80 an hour, and IAs who work at least 30 hours a week earn benefits just like a teacher would. So now that I've shared a little bit about the positions, the qualifications, I want to take a look at where we stand in terms of IA hiring. There are approximately 2,752 IA positions in our district. Among these, 1,500 plus are special education and 1,198 are regular education. And as of our June 2021 data, we had an 11% vacancy rate among all of our IA positions. And to break that down, it's essentially 296 vacant IA positions. 208 of those were special ed and 88 were regular ed positions. Also,
Jay, just one more point of clarification. The 1,900 or so regular ed are primarily...
1,100, sorry.
1,100 regular ed are primarily or solely elementary.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And the 2,000 some special ed are K-12.
Correct, yep. So also on this slide, you'll see vacancy rates for teaching positions, which I referenced in the last item at about 97%. And also included on there are receptionist positions and clerical assistants, and I think the receptionist and clerical are a pretty good comparison point as they're paid relatively the same, and they're also primarily school-based positions. So you can see that those rates are higher in terms of the fill rates, lower in terms of the vacancy rates. And again, it's important to note that these all continue to be snapshots of data. We referenced the June data because that was more stable than once we turn the new fiscal year and positions turn and change. So, but that does give us a good understanding of where we are.
Sorry, could you repeat how many overall positions we have in both regular ed and spec ed?
Yes, ma'am. So the total number of positions that we have are 2,752 IA positions in the district. 1,500 of those plus are special education, 1,554, and 1,198 are regular education. So those are the total positions. When it comes to the vacancies that we looked at in June, it was 296. 208 of those being special education and 88 being regular education.
Thank you.
So even though these numbers remain fluid, the vacancy rate among IA positions is clearly trending higher than other similarly paid positions at the school level. This is why additional recruitment efforts are needed to attract candidates to fill these critical positions that are directly in classroom supporting students. So today we're offering a recommendation for a new sign-on bonus for all IAs hired between July 1 and November 21st of this year. The bonus structure aligns similarly with what you approved for bus drivers, but we did change it a little bit, and you'll note there is an updated précis both in your work session materials and in your action item materials as well. So instead of the 400 up front and the 800 that we did for bus drivers, we are recommending 600 up front for IAs and then another 600 the following year. If they remain in the position through October 31st of the next year, we would pay that second installment in November. So it serves as both a recruitment and a retention to help try to keep folks with us as well. And then the first 600 would be paid after the 3 months starting in the current position. So folks who started now would actually be paid, could be paid as early as October of this year. So all IAs hired at 50% or greater will be eligible, would be prorated if under 100%. I think on the next slide, so in terms of next step, we'll ask for your approval of this recommendation later this evening if feedback warrants that. And while we prefer not to present something at the same time that we ask you to vote on it, we really tried not to do that, but just the timing of this and trying to make a positive impact on the start of the school year, we felt it was necessary in this case. And we'd like to begin advertising the bonus and attract more candidates as soon as possible. We've also launched a new IA recruitment page that we could update with this information if the board approves. We will continue our community email messages, social media, to highlight the openings as well as the potential bonus. And we do have an IA virtual information session that we're holding for IA candidates on July 26th. We did one back earlier in the spring, and we'll have another one as well. We've had success in holding similar situations, again, like I referenced, for bus drivers, substitutes, so we hope that will help us as well. And again, in October 2021, the first $600 payments would begin going out to eligible IAs. And then we also know we need to look to improve compensation for our current IAs. $600 is not going to be the difference of whether or not they stay, and we need to take care of and support the folks who are currently in those positions. So we continue to focus on that as well. As you know, the board's committed $10 million for non-certified raises for this school year within the budget. So we continue to evaluate that as we wait on the state budget, so we know what the impact of that will be, and we are just keeping our IAs in mind and pretty much at the forefront of that planning as we looked at that $10 million. So at this point, I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
All right, thank you for bringing that to us. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that information and for all of the efforts that you're doing to address this shortage. I know that's a lot of work. I just drove with my kids and dog to Indiana to visit family, and I noticed billboards from various school systems, in different parts of the country from here, going Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, all advertising for employees. I mean, this is a national issue of staffing shortages within school systems. So I appreciate your efforts on that. Can you please remind me, if someone is applying, are they applying for a specific school, or they'll submit their application and then they're offered a position somewhere in the county? How would that work?
Yes, ma'am, good question. So they do apply to specific openings and positions at schools. So even within a school, you could have multiple instructional assistant positions open, but you can also click on to be eligible at multiple schools or be in the IA pool, but they are applying for a particular position.
Okay, I appreciate that. I know that some of our municipal chambers of commerce have job fairs that they're hosting at different times, so I'm not sure if the school system itself is not necessarily a member of those different chambers, but if there's a region where you might have an elementary school in the region of that particular chamber, or if there's a job fair going on that we're also I don't know if that's something that we're also sort of keeping track of, if we're able to participate in those as well.
Yeah, that's something we can definitely look at. I don't think historically we've gone to chamber job fairs and such, but certainly would be a good suggestion to take advantage of.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. That was my only.
Ms. Carter.
Sorry. Thank you for this. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you looking specifically, because since I've come to the board, I've noticed a troubling, to me, issue with the vacancies with IAs. And I am glad to hear about the bonus, but as you mentioned, I am really concerned about the compensation. If you pull up, just for those who are wondering, to get to $15 an hour, you're talking about 20 years, 20, with this school system. So I ask that folks just let that sink in. And that's not only for IAs, but that's other grades as well, 16, 17, 19, 20. There's others that are below 15. Right. And I understand we are waiting for the state, but I am really looking for very specific plans on how we are going to be addressing the hourly rate. There are other neighboring counties that are very close on my side of town that are doing 15 or more an hour. So that creates a competition for us and very doable for staff that live in our districts. And that is a very big concern. I know for the board, or several members, I've heard you speak on that. I'll speak for myself, a huge concern. I do appreciate this, but I look forward to really the specific planning for the hourly rates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. This is just to learn more about this issue, Dr. Matillo. And I'm just curious, and Ms. Carter, I know may know some of this as well, but the difference between our IAs for general education and special education in terms of any special requirements, training, and then any differences in compensation. Also, can you tell us, is there any differentiation in how they're hired, how they're recruited? And then also, I was curious about ratios in special ed classrooms versus at elementary level.
Yeah, so good questions. In terms of the qualifications for hire, they are the same. In terms of pay, they are the same. And even within special education IAs, you have varying roles. You will have, a special education IA more in like a CCR classroom. You have some who are in our regional programs. We do often ask or need our special education IAs to get additional training that we offer at the district in things like crisis prevention and intervention, just so that they could better support students. So while the qualifications for hire may be the same, we do often ask more of our special education IAs. In terms of the ratio, I don't have those numbers with me. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Martin.
Thank you. Just a little extension to Ms. Carter's point. As it's not a surprise to anybody, I'm not a big fan of bonuses because we should be working at the systemic pay. My big concern about bonuses is that they really disadvantage people who are already working and committed to us. If I take the $1,200 bonus, if I figure a 40-hour week for 4 weeks a month for 10 months, that would be a total of 1,600 hours. So a $1,200 bonus for 1,600 hours comes out to effectively a 75-cent per hour payment. And so my question, so that would take a wage up to $12.55. How long would an IA have to work in the system to get $12.55, which is effectively what we're recommending to pay beginning people?
Ms. Carter?
3 years.
3 years. Okay, so what we're again, just to help let it sink in, what we're suggesting is that we're willing to pay the same amount to the new person coming in as someone who's already worked 3 years with us. I understand we've got an issue because we've got to fill positions, but that is the problem with a hiring bonus, is it really disadvantages people who have already committed to working with us over the years.
Yeah, and I don't disagree at all, Dr. Martin, and that's one of the reasons why we are trying to focus also on the hourly rate for our current IAs. And there has been, I haven't been here long in this role, but there has been a shift, I think, really at the district level in terms of how we think about non-certified compensation, and we have really realized within the last year that is something that we absolutely have to address and are committed to addressing our lowest paid pay scale. So while the bonus does hopefully help get bodies in classrooms so that we can fill the positions and critical needs, we know on the heels of that we also have to support and look at those pay scales, which we are doing and will be prepared to share updates on.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman Happy.
Dr. Matillo, I heard you reference the state budget. It's a general question for my colleagues. Anyone have an idea when that might come out so that we can get started on this work for our IAs and other staff?
Well, there was also a bill filed to increase the number of teaching assistants, because there are close to 10,000 fewer teaching assistants in the state right now than there were 12 years ago. And so it places, not to go off from your question.
No, but
Happy,
it's a similar
it places
point.
a lot of burden on the local school districts. And while we are a well-funded school district this is a systemic issue across the state. And so crucial, especially to having TAs in younger grades.
There's been There have been bills floated and language floated around raising the wage to $15 for everyone, including and addressing salary compression. It's a big ticket item. I would really be very pleased to see that come through. It is definitely needed. We've also seen, as you said, language around increasing the number of IAs, the formulas, basically. And the budgets that have been released, the proposed budgets that have been released, include a nominal raise for non-certified staff. I think it's 1.5% for 2 years, for a total of 3%. So, which is why we're going to have to rely on local dollars and the commitment that we're making to try to move faster than what's currently contemplated in the budgets. And I'll let Mr. Nieder add anything else.
Yeah, Ms. Mahaffey, to your question, at this point, the Senate has released their proposal. The House has not, and I've heard as recently as last week it may be Labor Day before we hear anything out of the House. In the Senate's proposal, as Superintendent Moore just stated, there's a nominal 1.5% for all non-certified staff in each of the 2 years of the current fiscal year that just began and the subsequent year. But in addition, in the Senate's proposal, there is bringing all non-certified support staff up to a minimum of $13 per hour. So if that were to become law, that would give, while that's still not where we need to be, that would put a better foundation underneath what we can do with the local funding, the $10 million. It would help us go further from there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I do just want to clarify, while we're waiting to update on plans, we have started the work. We're running projections every week, and what would it take in local dollars to get us here and get us here. So we are doing that work so that when we do have a better understanding, we're ready to bring forward recommendations quickly. Yes, ma'am.
And just for clarity, I think I'm pretty clear, but as I look at slide 4, it says the 1,200 sign-on bonus. Well, that's not actually a signing bonus. The 1,200 is the 600 that comes after 3 months, and then again after November.
Correct. So so it would not happen right at signing, but it would happen after 3 months within the position.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to be clear.
Yeah.
I think some could look at that and say there's a 1,200 sign-on bonus.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification.
Dr. Mark.
Just a quick additional clarification. That bonus is prorated to full-time employment. In other words, because not all of our IAs are full-time. So if they're 75%,
Correct.
It's 75% of that
Correct.
1,200. Yeah.
Correct. And down to 50%. So any 50% or above employee would have it prorated for their percentage.
Any other questions from the board? John Thompson.
You may not have the answer. Do you know what percentage of IAs are at the 50% hiring? Is it the majority or?
I would say are at 50% or above. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say the majority. I can get those numbers to you, but I don't have them at my fingertips.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And it may be a good reminder, too, that we have adjusted IAs back from that 93% to the 100% rate. Not rate, but months of employment.
All right. Any additional questions? Thoughts? Okay. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. All right. I think that takes care of our work session agenda for this afternoon. If I could entertain a motion to go into closed session, someone has that up, we could take care of a couple of closed session items agenda before our meeting.
Chair Sutton, I make a motion, we go into closed session to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-318.11, A1, A3, and A6 to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318, A3 in Wake County Board of Education, petitioner v. Town of Apex, respondent 21 CVS 9144 and NB, by and through TB, Burrs Wake County Board of Education 21 EDC 2273, to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the board in order to preserve attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the board, and to consult with and instruct the board, staff, or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the board on the particulars of the acquisition of the real property for public infrastructure improvements related to the STEM Early College High School site, and to receive board instruction as to the position to be taken on behalf of the board in negotiations in relation thereto, and also to consider confidential student information protected under GS 115C-402 and the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act 20 U.S.C. 1232G.
Got a motion and a second to go into closed session for the items just stated and that are listed on the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by sign of aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We're standing now closed session.